Be careful.
He went out to forget his past, then he faced men like the ones who killed his family. The land out past Silver Peak was quiet that spring, still cold at night, but dry enough for a man to keep to himself. I'd been alone out there for most of the season, just me, my tools, and the slow rhythm of rebuilding what a collapsed mine had taken from me. My shack wasn't big, just a square of hard-baked land tucked along the base of the Black Hills. A patch of earth too dry for a new life, but good enough for a man with no ambition beyond forgetting. That's how I liked it. Modest, predictable, no debts, no visitors. At 45, I'd lived more years in silence than in company. I remembered working the mines back when the territory still ran hot with gold fever and the promise of a future. I lost my family to one of those promises. Wrong place, wrong time. We were a family of 3, guiding our way through a new life, a promise of peace, a promise broken with the first earth tremor. And though I never blamed the mountain for it, I never quite forgave myself for not seeing the signs. After that, I stopped chasing meaning and started living in the shadows. No one could die from rebuilding a life and living in silence. I was sifting through river rock along the southern edge of the creek when I heard it, a sound sharp enough to break through the hum of wind and hoof flies. Not a mule, not a bird, something human and in pain. I straightened up, waited. There it was again, a yell, quick, muffled, followed by the clatter of a runaway buckboard and a chorus of angry curses. My gut tightened. This wasn't a lost traveler or a drunken cowboy. This was trouble. I unlooped the reins from the post, climbed onto my bay gelding, and kicked toward the dry gulch. My hands stayed close to the Winchester across my saddle. I didn't know what I was riding into, but the knot in my stomach felt familiar, like stepping back in time to the days when every breath was a gamble. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway, to keep more Wild West love stories coming. It took 5 minutes to reach the rise above the gulch. The horse stumbled to a stop on its own. Below, a scene of chaos unfolded. A buckboard lay on its side, one wheel spinning uselessly in the air. 2 men in dirty dusters were trying to free a third, whose leg was pinned under the wreckage. A 4th man, a wiry fellow with a scarred face and eyes as cold as a snake's, was pacing nearby, spitting curses into the wind. I knew his kind. He was the leader, the one with the brains and the meanness. He was what passed for authority out here. Then I saw her. She was tangled in the wreckage, a small figure in a tattered leather dress. She had a hand clamped over her side, but the dark stain spreading across the rawhide told me it looked too late. Her long black hair was a mess, some of it caught on a splintered board. She looked Ute, a young woman of the land I had once promised to protect. The men hadn't seen me yet, and for a second I had the perfect shot at the one with the snake eyes. But my gaze fixed on the young woman, on her face, etched with a pain so deep and so silent it tore a hole straight through me. I didn't blame the war for my family's death. I blamed men like these, men who saw people as property, as a prize to be hunted. My conscience, a thing I thought I'd long buried, rose from its grave and demanded to be heard. I couldn't just ride away. Not again, not after all the graves I'd already dug. I dismounted in one clean motion, took position behind a stand of mesquite, steadied my aim, and fired a single shot. The bullet hit the buckboard, splintering the wood, a warning. The men froze. They looked up, their eyes scanning the rise, searching for the source of the shot. "Get out!" I yelled, my voice a low rumble. "This ain't your land, and that ain't your prize." The leader, Snake Eyes, finally spotted me. He sneered, a flash of yellowed teeth. "Well, well, if it ain't a lone wolf looking to play hero," he said, his voice as slick as a coiled rattler. "That's our bounty, old man. Stolen goods, and she's worth a pretty penny." I didn't flinch. The second shot caught the dirt between his feet. He jumped back, a look of pure hatred on his face. "Leave her," I said, "and get off my land." He hesitated, sizing me up. Then he looked at the men struggling with the wreckage, at the young woman on the ground, and finally back at me. "This ain't over, Silas," he snarled. "That woman's got a price on her head, and I'll collect it, one way or another." He grabbed the reins of his horse and rode off, leaving his two partners to fend for themselves. The pinned man was screaming in pain, but Snake Eyes didn't care. He was only interested in the bounty. I waited until they were gone, then walked down slowly, rifle still raised. The young woman on the ground wasn't moving much. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and steady, soaking into the cracked dirt. I crouched beside her, keeping one eye on the road. Her eyes opened, glassy but focused. They met mine without fear, without a single plea. It was that look that hit me the hardest. She was a fighter, a survivor. She wasn't just a victim. I exhaled hard. "All right," I muttered. "Let's get you out of here." There was no way she could walk. I folded the Winchester under my arm, lifted her carefully, and carried her up to the horse. I'd done this before. Dead weight from battlefields or drunkards on cattle drives. This was different, though. This young woman wasn't a burden. She was someone's daughter, just a woman who had met the wrong men. I slung her across the saddle and climbed up behind, one hand keeping her steady, the other holding the reins. The ride back to the cabin was slow. I felt her breathing grow shallow against my arm. The blood was still wet on my shirt by the time we reached the cabin. The place was simple. Timber walls, stone hearth, one bed, one chair. I opened the door with my boot, laid the young woman down on the cot, and lit the oil lamp. I moved fast, water on a boil, needle and thread, a clean knife from the drawer. I washed my hands, then tore her dress open and started cleaning the wound. The bullet had torn through flesh and muscle, but hadn't broken bone. Luck, if you believed in it. The young woman groaned once when I poured the hot water. "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "That part hurts." I worked in silence for over an hour. My hands steady, my focus absolute. I sewed the deep gash in tight, slow lines, packed the worst spots with cloth, and bandaged the wound with strips of clean linen. It wasn't clean, not by a doctor's measure, but it would hold. When it was done, I sat down in the chair by the fire and watched her breathe. In, out, barely. I wasn't used to company, wasn't sure what came next, but the thought of letting a person die alone on a dirt path didn't sit right with me. Not after all the dying I'd seen. I poured water into a cup and sat by the bedside. She didn't reach for it, just breathed shallow and even. I leaned back, let the quiet settle. I hadn't asked who she was, didn't know if her tribe would come looking for her, didn't care much either way. I'd done what needed doing. That was enough. The young woman didn't speak for 3 days. I didn't expect her to. I checked her bandages each morning, replaced the soap cloths with clean ones, and spooned broth between her cracked lips. She swallowed when she could, turned her head slightly when I dabbed at the sweat, but never tried to talk. Her eyes stayed sharp, though, watching every movement from the cot, tracking me as I moved about the cabin. I didn't ask questions. I figured if she wanted to talk, she would. In the meantime, I kept to my routine. Feeding the horses, checking the lines, hauling water. I worked quiet like always, but there was a different weight now. The sound of another breath in the room, the sense that someone was watching, even if they never said a word. Kane and his men had been riding the county road all morning. The cabin sat within sight. Kane had seen the place from the rise, had time to mark it. He knew where I lived. He knew I had the woman. It was only a matter of time before he returned. The fourth morning came with the silence of a grave. I woke early, the pre-dawn chill biting at my coat as I stepped outside to check on the horses. The air was still heavy, like the world was holding its breath. My mind kept replaying Kane's face, his threat, his promise. I knew he was out there, lurking, waiting. He wasn't a man to forget a debt, especially not one that cost him a bounty. I went back to the barn, meaning only to check the feed bins, but my eyes caught the old satchel sitting on the workbench. It had been there for weeks, half forgotten beneath a coil of wire and a broken bridle. Inside were 3 sticks of dynamite wrapped in wax paper. I'd traded for them 2 months back, from a miner heading north. They weren't meant for war. They were tools, same as a shovel or a pick, meant to blast stubborn rocks from the fence line or open a dry gully for water runoff. Still, I'd kept them close. Out here, dynamite was as valuable as a rifle, maybe more so, and sometimes just the thought of having it was enough to ease a man's mind when he worked alone on open land. I picked one of the sticks up, turned it in my hand. It wasn't much to look at, just a tube of powder and promise. But it carried weight. I slid it into the inside pocket of my coat without thinking, the way a rancher might slip a knife into his boot. Habit. Insurance. A man never knew what the day might bring. And lately, with Cain prowling the country roads, I trusted habit more than luck. By the time I carried water to the horses, the satchel was shut again, tucked back under the tools. I told myself I didn't plan on using what I carried. I told myself it was foolish, dangerous even, to keep explosives so close to my chest. But another voice, quieter, older, reminded me of all the things I'd sworn I would never need again. The rifle, the scout's saddle, the knife I sharpened each night by the fire. A man makes promises in peace that he cannot keep in war. And though I tried to live as a miner, peace was a thin cloak. It tore the moment Cain rode into my life. I was finishing up at the barn when I heard a sound from the cabin, not a creak of the floorboards or the shift of a blanket, a sharp, distinct click, the sound of a rifle being cocked. My blood ran cold. I dropped the bucket and sprinted back, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I burst through the door, my own rifle raised, only to find the young woman standing by the window, her hands gripping the barrel of my Winchester, her eyes wide with fear. But her gaze wasn't on me, it was on the doorway. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl from outside. Cain. He had brought a mining foreman with him, a big, mean-looking man with a face scarred from a mining accident. He was a hunter, a man who knew how to use the land and its creatures as weapons. He stood a dozen feet from the cabin, a twisted grin on his face, his hand on the foreman's chain. "Come on out, Silas," he yelled, his voice a cruel mockery, "or I'll send my friend in to collect your prize." The young woman whimpered, a small sound of terror. She knew what this man was capable of. The air in the cabin grew thick with tension. The foreman growled again, a deeper, more menacing sound. I looked at the young woman, her face pale, her hands trembling around the rifle. And then I looked at Cain, at his cold, dead eyes. He wasn't just a bounty hunter, he was a sadist. And he wanted to watch me break. I was faced with a moral dilemma so raw and so brutal it felt like a knife in my gut. He wasn't just offering me a choice between my life and hers. He was offering me a choice between a clean death and a slow, agonizing one for both of us. He was a hunter, and he had us trapped. I could try to shoot the foreman, but a single shot wouldn't be enough. It would only enrage it, and it would tear us to shreds. I could try to shoot Cain, but he would release the foreman first. I was out of options. Then, a voice in my head, a voice that sounded a lot like my own, whispered to me, "A man's honor is not in his victories, but in his choices." I looked at the young woman. Her eyes, so full of silent courage before, were now filled with a terror she couldn't hide. She was just a woman, a child of the desert, and I had brought this upon her. I had to do something. I had to face him. I walked to the door and slowly, deliberately, slid the bolt back. "Let the woman go," I said, my voice low and steady, "and I'll come out." Cain laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You think I'm a fool, Silas. That woman's the prize. You come out, and she comes out. Either way, she's mine." My jaw clenched. He wasn't going to budge. He wanted the woman, and he wanted to see me suffer. Then, in a moment of pure, desperate clarity, an idea struck me. It was reckless. It was insane. But it was the only way. I looked at the young woman. "Listen to me," I said, my voice a whisper. "When I go out, you get ready to run. Don't look back. Don't stop. Just run." She shook her head, her eyes pleading. "No, I won't leave you." "Yes, you will," I said, a little more forcefully this time. "You will live to fight another day. It's the only way." I took a deep breath, and with one hand, I pushed the door open. My rifle was still in my hand. Cain's grin widened. The foreman snarled, tugging at the chain, its eyes fixed on me. Finally, he said, "Time to pay the piper, Silas," but I didn't come out. I stayed just inside the doorway, my body a shield for the young woman. I took a stick of dynamite from my belt, lit the fuse, and threw it at the foreman. The explosion was deafening. It tore through the ground, sending a plume of dust and dirt into the air. The foreman reared back, howling in pain and fury. It broke its chain and charged, not at me, but at Cain. The hunter screamed, dropping his rifle, trying to outrun the beast he had so carelessly used as a weapon. This was the shocking moment, the twist that no one saw coming. The hunter became the hunted. The moral choice was not about sacrificing myself, but about using the enemy's own cruelty against him. The foreman, blind with rage, tore into Cain, his screams echoing through the canyon. The other two men, who had returned, stood frozen in shock. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Then, they turned and fled, leaving their leader to his fate. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I turned to the young woman. "Come on," I said, taking her hand. "We have to go." We ran. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. We ran for hours, through the dust and the heat. The sound of the gunshots from the other two men long gone. She didn't falter. Her pain was evident in every step, but she didn't complain. She was a fighter, a survivor. We found a small, hidden canyon, a place where the sun didn't reach, a place where the wind was a soft whisper instead of a scream. We collapsed under the shade of a lone mesquite tree, our bodies trembling with exhaustion. I looked at her face streaked with dirt and tears, and I saw not a victim, but a woman of immense strength. She had stolen a horse to escape her captors. She had faced down a raging foreman. She had held her own in a battle that had nothing to do with her, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't leave her. I had a debt to pay. Not to her tribe, not to the world, but to myself. A debt of honor. I took out my canteen and handed it to her. She drank, her throat working hard. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Lena," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It means light in my language." I smiled, a real smile, for the first time in a decade. "Lena," I said, the name feeling like a cool drink of water on a hot day. "Well, Lena, it looks like we've got a long way to go." She looked at me, a flicker of something in her eyes, something that wasn't fear or pain, but trust. And in that moment, I knew that my journey was just beginning. The rest of that day was a blur of sun, shadow, and pain. Lena and I moved away from the cabin. The scent of gunpowder lingered. I knew we couldn't go back. We were on the run. Together. The bullet in my shoulder throbbed, a reminder of my choice. My world had been upended for a woman I'd met days ago, and some long-dead part of me was grateful for once. The ghosts were silent. We found shelter in a small, rocky outcropping as the sun began to set, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red. I slumped against the cool stone, my breath ragged. Lena, despite her own wound, was a whirlwind of quiet efficiency. She gathered brushwood for a small fire, careful to keep the smoke to a minimum. She found a patch of moss and herbs and began to crush them with a smooth stone. Her movements were graceful, purposeful. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. She knelt beside me, her eyes on my shoulder. "It must come out," she said, her voice a soft command. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. She didn't have a knife, so she used a shard of obsidian she'd found. Her hands were steady, her gaze unflinching. I watched her work, the pain a dull roar in my head, and I saw the strength of a healer, a woman who knew the land and its secrets. She was a light, blooming in the heart of the desert. When she was done, she wrapped my shoulder with a strip of her dress. She then tore another piece, wrapped her own wound, and looked up at me. "My people," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have a place, a hidden place. I can take you there." I hesitated. I had spent my life avoiding the Ute, the people I had failed. Going to their home would be a leap of faith I wasn't sure I could make. But I looked at her quiet strength, and knew I had no other choice. She was my only chance, The journey was a blur of pain and determination. I was weak, losing blood, my body screaming with every step. She guided me, her hand steady on my back, her voice a soft murmur of encouragement. She told me stories of her people, of the beautiful mountains, of the long walk, of a people who had endured more pain than I could imagine. She told them not for pity, but to show who she was, where she came from, the strength in her blood. She told me of the man who had betrayed her people, who had put a bounty on her head. I didn't ask why. I already knew. The night deepened, and so did the fever burning in my blood. The wound wasn't clean, it tore through muscle, leaving splinters of bone aching with each move. My vision blurred, and each stumble felt like it might be the last. Lena never faltered. She kept me upright with strength I wouldn't have believed from her size. At times, she spoke softly in her own tongue, words I didn't understand but felt like a tether to the world. When the fever broke into shivers, she stopped, pressing me down against the sand. From her pouch, she pulled roots, dried leaves, and a small bundle of crushed bark. She chewed them slowly, mixed them with water, and pressed the bitter paste to my lips. I tried to turn away, but she forced it between my teeth with surprising force. "Swallow," she commanded. I obeyed. The taste was foul, but warmth spread through my chest, dulling the fire in my shoulder just enough for me to breathe. We camped that night beneath a red stone ledge. She built no fire, only covered me with her blanket, whispering that smoke might give us away. I drifted in and out of blackness, each time waking to her face above mine, her hand on my brow, checking for death. She didn't allow me to give up, even when part of me begged for the quiet end of it. By the second day, my strength was nearly gone. The wound had clotted, but fever came in waves, drenching me in sweat. Lena forced me onward with patience and fury alike. She sang low songs of endurance. Once, when I fell to my knees, she pressed her forehead to mine. "If you stop here, you stop forever," she said, eyes burning with defiance. The land seemed to conspire against us. Shale cut my boots. The sun pressed down like a hammer. Buzzards circled overhead, waiting for collapse. But Lena knew the desert as her own body. She led us to hidden springs, to shade beneath cottonwoods, to cactus fruit, whose juice she pressed to my lips, keeping me alive one bitter mouthful at a time. At dusk of the third day, I nearly bled out. The bandage slipped, the clot torn when I fell against rocks. Blood soaked my shirt. My vision went white, then red, then nothing. When I woke, the sky was full of stars, and Lena crouched over me, hands stained with blood. She had pressed hot stones against the wound, chanting words older than the canyon. Pain ripped through me, sharper than any I had known, but it dragged me back. "You will not die here," she said. Not a plea, but a command. Every step after that was borrowed time, my body moving only by her will. She had become the spirit I thought buried with the men I failed. "Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." By the time we reached the throat of Silver Peak Canyon, I was more specter than man, carried by her resolve. And yet, when I saw the first hints of the canyon walls of sandstone rising like cathedrals, painted by the morning sun, I felt something stir within me. Survival was no longer just a debt to her. It was a promise. Lena had carried me across the threshold of death itself, and I owed her more than life. I owed her a future, one where her people would never again suffer betrayal from men like me. We reached the entrance to the Silver Peak Canyon at dawn, the sun a distant promise on the horizon. The canyon was a labyrinth of rock and shadow, a natural fortress. Lena led me through a narrow passage, and then we were there. It was a hidden world, a world of ancient stone and whispered prayers. I was a stranger in a strange land, and I could feel the eyes of the Ute on me, their gazes filled with suspicion and wariness. They saw a white man, a soldier, a ghost of the past. They didn't see the man who had saved one of their own. An elder, a man with a face as weathered as the rock walls themselves, stepped forward. He looked at me, then at Lena, his eyes a cold, hard challenge. "Why have you brought this man here?" "Lena," he asked, his voice a low, gravelly sound. Lena stepped forward, her body a shield between me and the elder. "He saved my life, grandfather," she said, her voice strong and clear. "He risked his own to save mine. He is a man of honor." The elder looked at me, a long, searching look. "Honor?" he scoffed. "A white man's honor is a flimsy thing, a lie told to justify their greed." My gut told me to fight, to justify myself, but Lena's words, her quiet strength, held me back. I knew I couldn't fight them. I had to earn their trust. I had to prove I was worthy. I had to show them, not tell them. I was a man of action, not words. I was Silas. I let go of her hand and stepped forward, facing the elder. "I don't expect you to believe me," I said, my voice low and steady. "I have made mistakes. I have seen good men die because of my own foolishness. I have lived with that shame for a decade. I didn't save your granddaughter for glory or for money. I saved her because it was the right thing to do, and if you want to kill me, then do it. But know this, I am no longer the man I was. I am a man who fights for what is right, not for what is easy." The elder looked at me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of a lie. He saw none. He saw a man who was broken, a man who was burdened by his past, but a man who was also seeking redemption. He saw me. He didn't see the soldier. He didn't see the ghost. He saw Silas Thorne. "You may stay," he said, his voice a little softer this time, "but only under watch. Time will show if your words are truth. And you will not bring your kind of war to our home." Lena took my hand, a small, grateful smile on her face. I had done it. I had passed the test. For the next few weeks, I lived among the Ute. It was a time of healing, a time of learning. Lena nursed me back to health, her hands a gentle comfort, her voice a steady presence in my life. She taught me about the land, about the plants, and their healing properties. She taught me about her people, about their traditions, about their history. She showed me a world I had long forgotten, a world of honor and resilience, a world I had once promised to protect. I watched her, saw her with her people, and I finally understood her. She was a woman who had been through hell and back, but she had never lost her spirit. She was a woman of strength and courage, a woman who had chosen to be a survivor instead of a victim. And in that quiet, hidden world, I found my purpose. Not as a soldier, not as a miner, but as a man who had finally found his home. The weeks I spent in the canyon changed me. The wound in my shoulder healed, but the wounds on my soul began to mend as well. The Ute people, once suspicious, had begun to accept me, not as one of their own, but as a man who had earned his place. They called me Wakas, a word that meant peace, harmony, and balance. It was a name I never thought I'd be worthy of, a name I wore with humility. In the quiet days that followed, I learned more than how to bind wounds or gather herbs. I learned silence, and what it meant to listen to the wind scraping across the stone, to the laughter of children who had once run from me, to the prayers spoken softly at dawn. Every face I met carried history, yet they did not let it become chains. They lived with a steadiness that humbled me, a way of walking the earth as though each step mattered. In their firelight, I was no longer just a man on the run. I was a man rediscovering what it meant to live with purpose. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my rifle lessen, as if violence was no longer the only language I understood. Lena, my bright light, had given me peace and a reason to live again. Love had bloomed in the most unlikely place, a war-torn desert. When word spread that we would soon leave, there were no protests, no cries to make us stay. Instead, there were quiet nods, offerings of dried meat, blankets, and blessings, whispered in Ute I could barely grasp, but felt in my bones. The elder's eyes softened as he pressed a hand to my shoulder. He did not forgive the past, but he acknowledged the man I was trying to become. As I walked through the canyon one last time, I felt every gaze upon me measuring, questioning, yet no longer condemning. The land itself seemed to hold me, reluctant to let go, but urging me onward. I understood then that peace was never a place to keep, but a gift to carry forward. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. One day, as we sat by the fire, watching the stars bloom across the night sky, she told me that the time had come for us to leave. The elder, her grandfather, had received word that Cain and his men were still active, still looking for us, and had recently moved into a small town called Redemption, a place known for its lack of law and order. Rumor said he'd survived, the foreman's attack scarred, meaner than before. Lena's grandfather had asked her to leave, for my safety and for the safety of her people. It was a plea, not an order. I looked at her quiet resolve, and I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't run, not this time. No, I said, my voice low and firm. We're not running, we're going to face them. Lena's eyes widened in surprise. Silas, you can't. They're too many. You're no match for them. I took her hand, my fingers lacing with hers. I'm not the man I was, Lena. I'm Wakas, and a man of harmony fights for what is right. I smiled, a small, weary smile. This isn't a war, Lena. This is justice, and it's a debt I have to pay, not for myself, but for you, and for the honor of your people. She looked at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes, but also a deep understanding. She knew that I couldn't run. Not after what had happened. We had to face our demons, together. She nodded, her hand tightening around mine. Then I will go with you, to fight by your side. We left the canyon the next day, our hearts heavy with a sense of purpose. The elder lent us 2 tough ponies and a small prayer bundle for the trail. We rode for 2 days, our bodies tired, our minds focused. We reached Redemption, a town that was anything but, a place of dust and despair. It was a town of saloons and brothels, of men with guns on their hips and greed in their eyes. The kind of town that had created Cain. We found a small, quiet livery stable on the edge of town, a place where we could lay low and plan. We learned that Cain had set up shop in the saloon, a place called the Gilded Cage. He was lording over the town, his men a constant presence, their guns a silent threat. He had become the law, a twisted, brutal version of it. The townspeople were too afraid to stand up to him, their spirits broken, their hopes crushed. I couldn't just walk in and shoot him. I needed my training, my knowledge of the land. I had to be a ghost. Lena was my eyes and ears. She moved through the town with a quiet grace, her presence unnoticed by the men who had once hunted her. She learned their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. She was a silent partner, a deadly force of nature. She was the one who told me that Cain had a shipment of gold coming in from a nearby mine, a small fortune that would give him the power he needed to take over the town for good. That was our chance. We waited for the gold to arrive. We watched as Cain's men unloaded the crates, their eyes darting around nervously, their hands on their guns. I saw the fear in their faces, the greed that had consumed their souls. I knew that they were just pawns, just tools in Cain's twisted game. But Cain himself was a different story. He was the snake, the poison that had infected the town. I waited until the sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the street. The town was quiet, the people indoors, too afraid to come out. I stood in the middle of the dusty street, my rifle in my hand. My heart was a steady drumbeat. I saw Cain step out of the saloon, a triumphant look on his face. He saw me. His smile faltered. He recognized me. He recognized the man who had outsmarted him, the man who had taken away his bounty. "You," he snarled, his hand inched towards his gun. "You have a death wish, Silas?" "No," I said, my voice echoing in the silence. "I have a purpose." He drew his gun, his movements a blur. But I was faster. I fired, not at him, but at the porch lamp above the saloon door. The glass shattered, plunging the street into darkness. He was a man who relied on sight, on brute force. I was a man who relied on instinct, on the shadows. He fired wildly, his bullets hitting the wall behind me. I moved, a shadow in the night, a ghost of the past. He was a good shot, but I was better. I had trained with the best. I had learned from the Ute. I was a man of the shadows. I moved, and then I was on him, rifle slung over my shoulder. My fist connected with his jaw, a loud, cracking sound. He fell to the ground, his gun clattering uselessly on the dirt. I stood over him, my rifle aimed at his head. The townspeople, emboldened by the darkness, had come out of their homes, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Justice is served," I said, my voice low and steady. "He is yours now. You can choose to live in the shadows, or you can choose to live in the light." Lena, my quiet strength, stood beside me, her hand a reassuring presence on my back. We had done it. We had faced our demons, and we had won. We had not only saved ourselves, but had given a town a second chance at life. The townspeople, once defeated, were now filled with a new hope. They had seen a man of honor, a man who had fought not for himself, but for them. The dust of redemption lingered long after Cain had fallen. The silence weighed heavier than the gunfire hours before. People, worn faces, tired eyes, emerged like ghosts. They looked at me not with suspicion, but with something fragile: hope. A few picked up tools, a woman lifted her child, and the sheriff, once broken, now stood taller, his badge catching the last streaks of daylight. That evening, the sheriff approached. "You could stay," he said. "Help me keep order. Be the law this town deserves." I knew the truth. Redemption wasn't mine. My place was never behind a desk or wearing a star. I had found what I needed, not a home or a job, but a purpose that moved with me wherever the wind carried us. I turned to Lena, who stood close, her hand folded softly into mine. Her eyes were on the horizon, where the last light of day bled into the sky, and I could see in her gaze the same truth I felt. "Are you ready?" I asked her, my voice low, almost reverent. She smiled, small, sad, but steady. "We have done what we needed to do here. It's time." So we left at dawn, 2 riders against the rising Sunday. The air was sharp with morning chill, the kind that wakes your lungs and clears your mind. Behind us, redemption stirred to life, the sound of hammers striking wood, of voices daring to rise again. Ahead, nothing but the open desert stretched wide, endless and uncertain. We rode in silence for miles, not emptiness, but fullness, like the space between stars. The desert, once barren, now felt alive. Every wind carried sage and dust, every horizon a new promise. We were not fugitives anymore, not broken remnants of a lost past or a terrible fight. We were wanderers, seekers, lovers. Nights we camped under the stars, her head resting on my chest while the coyotes sang their songs in the distance. Days we rode through valleys where the rivers carved silver lines through the rock, where wildflowers dared to bloom despite the cruelty of the Sunday. Each mile was a lesson, each sunrise a promise, and yet, even as peace wrapped itself around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. There were still shadows in the world, men like Cain who thrived on fear and greed. The Wild West was not a land that stayed quiet for long, and sometimes, in the hush of dawn, I wondered if fate was merely giving us a pause before the next storm. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Lena slipped her hand into mine, her eyes reflecting the blaze. She whispered the names of stars, teaching me the constellations of her people. I listened, not just to the words, but to the music of her voice, each syllable soft as river water. Then, for reasons I can't explain, she placed my palm against her belly. A silence thicker than the desert night fell between us. I looked into her eyes, and though she said nothing, I understood. My throat closed, my breath caught. In that fragile, unspoken moment, I felt the universe shift. A child, our child. The thought filled me with a joy so fierce it almost hurt. Not born of violence or survival, but of love, our love. A miracle in a land where miracles were scarce. I wanted to believe that was enough. That a cabin in a hidden valley, a quiet life, and the laughter of children would be our destiny. But something in the way the wind howled that night, restless and wild, told me otherwise. The next morning, before dawn, I rose. The fire was ash, the stars fading. I watched Lena sleep, her face calm, her hair spread across the blanket like ink spilled over parchment. My chest ached. Deep down, I knew, peace never stays. The road always calls. At sunrise, we saddled up once more. Only the memory of two riders chasing something bigger, an unwritten, uncertain future. Perhaps we'd find that valley someday, or perhaps storms still waited. All I knew, as long as we rode together, the horizon would never end.